Mhm. 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 Hello, everyone. I'm doing a late night stream because I have no real schedule and I have no, I don't know, like I don't stream on usual times because I just sleep and wake up at different times because of my insomnia. How is everyone? I know some people are watching because it shows you the little numbers. Like I think one or two are bots, so I don't know. Like if it says three people, so maybe it's like one person and two bots, or two people and one bot. I don't know. But today I actually have some topics. I actually planned a little instead of just jumping into a stream and playing a video game. If you're uh, typing some comments in VGG, then I can't see them because I'm looking at my own stream right now. I should, so using my this PC, I should do the, what do you call it? I haven't done this in a while. Do you keep my chat above everything or something? Just so I can see the comments. What was it called? Oh, I have the app open. Mhm. Like this, I guess. And then no, that's strange. Uh, Let me see. I think I got the hotkey correct, but I'm. Was it this or this? I'll figure something out. But um, I was planning to watch a video from then and now. It's a really good channel, and the person, I don't know their name, uh, has a very good grasp on philosophy and stuff. So their videos are interesting. Also, if my voice sounds weird or something, let me know because I'm always messing with this thing. I can't figure out how to properly set up my audio. Then I was gonna talk about some I was gonna look at and try to figure out some gun stats in Canada because I'm not sure how this works. The also look at the new law that the Canadian Prime Minister proposed about banning sales or trades of new guns. I'm not sure how they're gonna enforce that and whether it's useful or not. Oh, I'm not sure how much people care either way, but I'm interested, so I want to talk about it. And then I saw some link to some weird QAnon shit. We all know that they're a bit wacky. So let me open up the channel. Where is it? This one. Is it this one? Nope. The screen is black. It should be this one. Let me see the. Yeah, it should be this one. Okay, here we go. There we go. Um, I actually have chat open. Why is this? Okay, whatever. So the video I was thinking of, which isn't, this is the channel then and now. It's a really good channel. I've binge watched a lot of their videos, as you can see. I just found them recently. And we can pick any video and it'll be good, but I was thinking of, where is it? This one particularly. I want to watch this one again anyways, so maybe watching it with on stream with chat I thought would be fun. And let's go, I guess. Why is this being so annoying? Okay. Yeah. Wait, what the hell? Why is... Okay. That's interesting. Oh, whatever. Let's start the video. Where did it go? Oh, here we go. Nature nurture.
So I've got my essay written, and I've been working on it for about a week. So now I'm going to show you how I use Grammarly to edit. Okay, so here's my essay, and I'm going to click through Grammarly suggestions in the right panel.
You can't see the entire screen, so I need to figure out how to... I need to figure out how to get my chat to show up while I'm... And what's happening with this one? Maybe I need to close this application and restart it, the one that keeps tabs on top, because it's not working. Let me just find it. How is everyone's day, by the way, if anyone wants to comment or something? Until I find this and restart this app. Where did I store? Oh, maybe here. Yeah. Then here. Okay, here we go. The hotkey was Control plus space, right? I think so. So let's see. I hope this time it works. Nope. Why not? Control space. Or is it Alt space? It's not Alt space, it's Control space or Shift space. Maybe it's Shift space. That's annoying. I can't see chat then, because if it goes full screen, I won't be able to see chat. Okay, I'll try it on another app. It works on this one. Why isn't it working on... It used to work in here, but I don't know why it's not working anymore. Why? maybe if I, and then, okay, now it worked. Now I can see chat and we can have it be full screen. Okay, let's go.
This is my box of human nature. It contains everything in it that's in your nature. What does that mean? Well, in short, if it's in your nature, it's unchangeable. It's undeniable. It's part of your very constitution. And it's in a box because it's impervious to everything outside of it. Locked in a cage, unadaptable. The question is, what do you think is in the box? Do you think the box is full, empty, somewhere in between? On the other hand, outside of the box, we have all of this, the environment, all that stuff around you that's ever been around you, that has an effect on you, how you're formed, how you develop, who you are as a person. Does any of this get inside the box? Maybe the box is empty, a blank slate, as the philosopher John Locke put it, filled up as you grow up, as you develop. Seriously, what do you think might be in here? We're going to skim over some complicated sounding things. DNA, genetics, epigenetics, methylation, phenotypes, stress, twin studies, Steven Pinker, and early intervention programs.
This
But
is a philosophy
I want to
channel, so
avoid being technical as much as possible, because
that's gonna be the
most
focus.
crucially, most simply, this box is about a fundamentally philosophical idea: freedom.
Debates about nature-nurture inform almost every area of human life, from biology and botany to economics, literature and history. To simplify, thinkers on the nature side have, in varying ways, argued that at least parts of your body and mind are behind an impenetrable skin, cannot be gotten to by upbringing, education, politics or culture.
They're often referred to as nativists. They believe we have an
My commentary isn't going to be very riveting because this person knows much more about all of this than I do. I'm just sort of learning and trying to understand it myself. But I sort of understand the nature-nurture debate and how it's involved. And I watched this video before. He's basically gonna talk about how it sort of changed and shifted the talk about like your own natural being when science became more like when we started learning more about how our bodies work and DNA and everything. And then we learned about genes and how that was used to like delegitimize lived experiences and instead focus more on it's just nature. And of course there's going to be some racism.
innate human nature. Of course, it's undeniable that people grow, change, adapt, interact with the world. But nativists believe that this change, at least in some part, emerges from the box. Imagine a one-way street. You might have an innate eye colour or a creativity that comes out of your DNA one way. Nothing gets into it.
To take one example, the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes argued that we are naturally competitive. We sought glory. We're prone to violence. These things come out of us. They have an effect on others, but no culture, politics, education, upbringing, or environmental change could change that fundamental, universal, timeless fact. On the other hand, we have empiricists. They, roughly speaking, believe in a two-way street instead of a one-way street. Another English philosopher, John Locke, for example, thought that the mind was a tabula rasa, a blank slate, and all humans were shaped in different ways by their experiences, what they see, hear, touch, what they're taught, how they're raised. Experience comes in.
Okay, let's return to those nativists, the ones who believe that we have a nature. What is it that they actually believe is behind the barrier in the box? Well, depending on who you ask, it can be anything from IQ, a capacity for violence, economic self-interestedness, a propensity for addiction, the likelihood of a certain disease at a certain age. The list goes on.
There are two things I want to think about here. First, what does the evidence say? And second, what are the consequences of that evidence today for philosophy and politics? What does it mean for human society if either nature or nurture are true?
The central point that's been made across the
That is the interesting thing. Like, the evidence itself isn't as important as how people sort of talk about it, in the sense that only in like a very constrained and narrow sense do just people deal with the evidence. Even in scientific discussion and broader theories. I know a little bit about like scientific, like how scientists sort of think, because I've studied physics, so I know a bit about that. But when you're doing a certain experiment, for example, then you're focused on the evidence and basically everything around it, because you don't want to bias the experiment itself. But so outside of those parameters, there's more leeway, even in science. So when you're not in the lab and you're not actually researching something, then of course scientists still are like very empirical, so they believe in the evidence, but their interpretations can vary. Their biases come into play. Their own experiences sort of form what they think and how they think things, and coming up with theories. And of course, that is about just like physical theories, which in the end are from the physical world. You can't really change that. In the end, new evidence comes and theories get like what's the word? Theories get disproven or become like they're sort of not true. They're proven not true or something. But in the social realm and in our like with biology and with living species and especially humans, it's much harder. Like the complexity increases a lot when you go from a few particles to like even some thousands of particles, and we are made of like millions and billions of particles. And the way that it happens sort of like the game itself becomes completely different. You can't talk about it in a physical sense anymore, and then a lot of just bias comes in, and the evidence it sort of becomes hard to know like what the actual evidence is and where the like it's just your biases and the narrative that you want to create.
The history of this debate is this. If people have a nature, if they're trapped in the box, then it's no good doing any intervening to try and improve things. Intervention here is the key word. What parts of us are malleable? And who or what is shaping those parts? Who or what is intervening, nurturing upon our lives? We'll return to this question at the end.
But first, the idea that we have a nature has been approached in countless ways, philosophically, psychologically, theologically, but the most persuasive throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. The best place to start is biology, the study of DNA and our genes. Okay, bear with me while we get technical for just a second. To get to the foundation of nature-nurture, we have to talk about DNA. All of life is about replication. You came, as most species did, from a single cell. A cell that contains everything that's in your nature, everything that's in that box.
Reading difficulties? Push. Point.
The cell duplicates and divides into 2, which then divide into 4, and to 8, and 16, and 32, and so on, until in a human they reach 50 trillion. Each of those cells contains DNA in the nucleus in the centre, which is made up of a long double helix of chemicals called base pairs. Humans have 3 billion base pairs, and they are 99% identical for all of us. The order of those base pairs, which are made up of only 4 molecules, A, G, T or C, determine everything from eye colour to toenails to neurons. The order of the base pairs in the DNA tells the cell what to do and how to replicate itself, and when a cell replicates, the DNA helix unravels and tells the cells which ingredients it needs to make 2 new strands. Genes and the DNA that make them guide everything in life. They tell the cell which proteins to make, which are the building blocks of all life. Proteins make up the structure of the body, used to transport blood, used as antibodies, as a defence. They come in all shapes and sizes, and there could be up to 400,000 proteins in the human body, and the code for how to make them comes from the DNA strands in each and every cell.
So if anything is in the nature box, DNA is. It's at the bottom of that one-way street, the absolute inside. DNA replicates itself, passes it on into the next box it creates. It contains the ingredients, the blueprint, the code to make someone tall or intelligent or a self-interested Hobbesian brawler or autistic maybe, or quick-witted. And no amount of environmental stuff outside can change it because it stays the same in every cell, from when you're born to when you pass down your genes to the next generation.
But is this really true? Remember, all of life is about the duplication of cells, and all of cells contain the same DNA, your human nature. And your DNA is your DNA, unchangeable by the environment around it. But when this was discovered in the 19th century, some people began to wonder, if DNA makes everything, but always the same in each cell of the creature, how does, when it replicates, it begin to know when to make a head, a nose, a liver, a neuron, a hair, a nail, a blood cell? When the first cell you came from divided into 2, did one of those cells contain your legs and your feet, and the top contain your neck and head and brain? One scientist, Hans Dreisk, even decided to separate the cells of sea urchin embryos, thinking they'd grow into 2 separate deformed sea urchins, a top and a bottom. But to his surprise, they grew into 2 normal healthy urchins.
In other words, when our cells divide, there must be some mechanism for telling the cells how to divide, something to tell the DNA what to do. So it cannot be a one-way street. Something, some message has to go the other way, has to get to the box to signal to it what to do. Where does this come from? The answer, of course, the environment. DNA must be nurtured in some way.
Nobel laureate Christiane Nusslein-Volhard writes that the cell receives signals and information from the environment, including the neighbouring cells. This information is transmitted to the genes. In this manner, the fate of a cell is dependent on both the cytoplasm and external influences. So what the DNA does depends on how it interacts with other molecules, the proteins and cells it encounters. That is everything around it. It receives signals in some way from the environment. It cannot be a one-way street. But how? Only in the last few decades has a revolutionary answer to this question been discovered. One that's having a huge impact on almost every field, from biology to philosophy. Epigenetics.
Here it comes.
Okay, back to that one-way street. Genetic determinism is the idea that your characteristics and traits come out of the box, that they are nature, and they come out in the same way irregardless of any environmental interaction with them. They come out of your DNA and make you. Epigenetics, meaning on or above genetics, is the discovery that whatever's in the box can be switched on and off, and even more than that, can act like a dimmer switch, producing more or less of some quality.
To know what to do, how to act, DNA requires signals from the environment. It needs to know which of the millions of combinations to execute and express. It simply cannot be unresponsive to environmental signals.
DNA contains so much data, it boggles the mind. If unwound, it would be around 2 meters long in each of those 50 trillion cells. But certain molecules from the environment, called histones and metal groups, can wind themselves around the DNA, bunch it up so that a particular part of the DNA cannot express itself. The information is silenced. This is called methylation. Another group of chemicals, acetyls, open the DNA so that it can express itself again.
These processes are the ones that are right at the foundation of nature-nurture and show us that that duality of nature or nurture is nonsensical. What we in some way have, and even this isn't accurate, is nature and nurture interacting in a dance. DNA has what biologists call regulatory sites that different molecules are able to bind to, changing the function of the DNA, telling it what to do.
This discovery has had some groundbreaking implications for so many areas: memory, cancer, depression, obesity, autism, addiction, aging, exercise, nutrition, toxins. We'll look at a few of them, and then we'll return to think a little bit more about some philosophy and think of the implications of what we've learned.
Of course, he was just describing how the things work, so there isn't much to comment on here. But this sort of essentialist argument that it's just the DNA and none of what you do actually matters is like kinda like I don't know how to describe it. It's like dooming humans to a fate that they might not want. Like if it was all just nature, then existing sort of becomes like a struggle, a drag, because it's your nature anyways. Like whatever what you do, what you end up doing. Of course, even in like scientific processes, this isn't true, and he's shown how that sort of works, and he'll talk about the philosophy later in the video, as he said.
Randy Jertel and Michael Skinner write that the word environment means vastly different things to different people. For sociologists and psychologists, it conjures up visions of social group interactions, family dynamics, and maternal nurturing. Nutritionists might envision food pyramids and dietary supplements, whereas toxicologists think of water, soil, and air pollutants. But scientists now have evidence that these vastly different environments are all able to alter gene expression and change phenotype. That is, the characteristic, the trait, like eye colour, in part by impinging on and modifying the epigenome.
I want to ask this. Where are the clearest places this process happens? Where does the environment affect us in ways we have direct evidence for? Are those places limiting or expanding our freedom? And how can we think about that more simply and more philosophically? How can we think about the consequences?
1. Toxins and pollutants. They've been shown to have an effect on cognitive functioning of children, as do mercury and some plastics and pesticides. Pollution in the form of fossil fuel combustion has been shown to be associated with poorer test results in kids. Frequencies of refuse collection, access to toilets and cleanliness of water have all been shown to be associated with cognitive performance in many low-income countries. And of course, all of these disproportionately affect poorer neighbourhoods. 2. Noise. Aircraft, traffic, crowded living conditions can all lead to poorer reading skills, higher blood pressure, and an increase in stress hormones. Poorer parents have less time to stimulate infants, which has negative outcomes later in life. A lack of stimulating materials, books, toys, etc. has the same results. Smaller classrooms, on the other hand, have a positive effect. 3. Nutrition. It's been found that a whole range of dietary habits leave epigenetic marks. Stress or famine, even when you're in the womb, lead to outcomes like obesity and stress for decades into the future. 4, 5 and 6, stress, anxiety and depression, or mental health disorders more broadly. Okay, let's slow down. I think stress is important. It shows a lot about this topic. Studies have shown that rats who are licked and groomed by their mothers in the first 10 days of their lives respond better to stressful events later in life. Rats from low licking and grooming mothers are more likely to become startled and act fearfully throughout their lives. And researchers found that the DNA had been methylated to stop a stress-reducing hormone from being produced. Neuroscientist David Moore writes that this conclusion is supported by a study of rat pups whose mothers were so stressed out that they treated their newborns abusively by frequently stepping on them, dropping them, dragging them, or handling them roughly. As a result of this maltreatment, the offspring grew up to have altered patterns of methylation in their brains. And studies on mice and monkeys show similar epigenetic changes throughout their lives. The breadth of these studies has important philosophical and political consequences. When it comes to stress, our bodies are almost identical to rats, but furthermore, suicide victims have also been found to have high levels of genetic methylation, as have victims of abuse and individuals whose mothers had depression while they were pregnant.
Win at work by communicating effectively.
The thing with methylation is that it's hard to get off. It's sticky. So early childhood experiences can literally get under your skin and really affect how your DNA operates for the rest of your life. Another study found a relationship between poverty in the first 5 years you've lived and epigenetic changes 20 to 35 years later.
It makes complete sense that animals and humans from more stressful early infant environments display high stress responses later in life, because the environment you're born into is a good predictor of what the rest of your life might look like. You might need your body to fight or flight more, have higher stress responses in areas with more predators, or more loan sharks. Poverty becomes biology. But you might be saying, of course there are still things in the box. We have the DNA. you couldn't epigenetically adapt the DNA to produce wings, and some people are surely naturally better at certain things and not as good at others. The DNA is surely still the DNA. Well, to think about this, we need to look at twins.
Identical twins have and come from the same box. If they're raised in different environments and the same stuff comes out, well, the box is unchanged. We've found nature, whatever it is.
The largest study of twins started in 1994 and looked at over 10,000 pairs of twins from the UK, the US and the Netherlands. They looked at twins who have been raised together up to a certain age, and raised apart, and looked for similarities and differences between them. If they've been raised apart all their lives but display identical traits, then it must be in the DNA, regardless of the environment. To summarise the results briefly, researchers have estimated that around half of these twins' traits could be attributed to their genes, and the other half to their environment. So around half and half. It's been found in another recent study that young identical twins have similar epigenetic markings, but as they get older they diverge. In other words, as their environment and experience changed them. Intelligence is also found to be increasingly heritable as twins get older. That is, as twins catch up with each other, regardless of their environment, how they've been raised, where they went to school, where they live. Some researchers have put the number as high as 2/3 nature and just 1/3 nurture.
But are we really seeing nature in these studies? First, in one recent meta-study, that's a study of studies. It's been found that in most of them, the term raised apart was used very loosely. Many of the twins were actually raised together, and many knew each other.
One study reviewed 121 cases that claimed to be raised apart. Only 3 had actually been separated shortly after birth and only just been reunited. Most had actually had an average of 10 years together at some point. Many of them were separated between the ages of 8 and 11, and most, almost all in fact, shared the same culture, the same socio-economic background, or knew each other as adults. And on top of this, of course, they shared the same environmental signals in the womb and the same conditions in the first weeks of their lives. Look at this quote from epidemiologist David Barker about plasticity in development. He says, "There are good reasons why it may be advantageous in evolutionary terms for the body to remain plastic during development. It enables the production of phenotypes that are better matched to their environment than would be possible if the same phenotype was produced in all environments. Plasticity during intrauterine life enables animals and humans to receive a weather forecast from their mothers that prepares them for the type of world in which they have to live. If the mother is poorly nourished, she signals to her unborn baby that the environment it is about to enter is likely to be harsh. The baby responds to these signals by adaptations such as reduced body size and altered metabolism, which help it to survive a shortage of food after birth."
Okay, let's try and bring this together in some way. There are things in the box, propensities maybe, but they're expressed in a wide variety of ways, epigenetically, depending on how they interact with the rest of the environment. The way our nature is expressed is dependent on a wide range of phenomena, like we've seen: toxins, pollutants, stress, education, culture, politics, prolonged experiences, levels of threat, in-womb development. The list is endless, and we're only really just starting to see how far it goes. So does that mean we're more blank slates? Or do these propensities mean we have a type of human nature? How can we make sense of this?
So we have to ask, do separated twins really escape this environmental effect? Steven Pinker's influential book The Blank Slate has a handy list of what he and anthropologist Donald Brown describe as human universals, meaning, in our nature, impervious to everything outside of it, the environment. Pinker handily tries to list all of them. You can see them through the link I've put in the description below. Have a look. Some of them, like tools, fear, fire, and cultural relativity, just to name a few, are almost laughable, or at the very least simplified or shallow. Fire, for example, it's not human nature, it's not in our DNA, in our genes, it's environmental, it's an interaction, and also I could conceivably live my entire life without it, and we have innovations that have superseded it in some way. And that's just one. But take fear. Okay, we all, I'd think, with a few exceptions, have experienced fear. Is it nature or nurture then? I'd say we have something like the raw ingredients for fear, or a propensity for fear, in the box. But the way those ingredients come together and are expressed and interact with the environment are impossible to understand without looking at the outside world, looking at culture and society and philosophy and change. I think you can still, despite things like a propensity for fear being in the box, make a strong case for something like blank slatism. There is no sense in which an idea or feeling of fear is imprinted on the mind, or body for that matter, in a universally, genetically determined, specific way before you are born. You have the biochemical propensity, the ingredients for it in your DNA. The DNA is then epigenetically expressed in a variety of ways, and depending on your environment, which includes the womb and the parent's environment, remember, before it even gets to the slate of the mind.
Yeah, there are a lot of for fear example, a lot of, I guess, cultural instances as well. Like, why would children be afraid of clowns unless there's like a culture that teaches them to be afraid of clowns? There's nothing like written in nature that clowns are to be scary. There might be some natural inclination towards fearing the unknown, for example, but fearing specific things is kind of taught by, whether consciously by your parents and society or subconsciously by your experiences. It's kind of weird to say that fear is all nature in the sense.
The blank slate. It's then mixed with other cultural, social and environmental factors that we absorb from experience that code or script the biology, chemistry and idea of fear in many ways, which may or may not, depending on the period and the culture, be expressed in particular ways for a particular period of time with certain triggers. Of course, what many of us are interested in when we're talking about nature, nurture, is not that we have fears, hormones, legs, need food, have a culture, those human universals, but how those supposed universals are expressed in the environment, by the environment, how our DNA unfolds, collides, synthesizes with the rest of the world, and that genetic determinism, the idea that nothing gets to the box and everything comes out, justifies one political, cultural and social position in particular, individualistic non-intervention. That because people are what their genetic inheritance is, intervention is an intrusive waste of time, money, and resources.
What's it like to learn math on Brilliant.org? Brilliant gets you hands-on.
If our genes are now conclusively affected by the environment, what does this mean philosophically, culturally, politically?
This is the real
Well,
meat of the
we are
argument.
intervened upon by our environment and other people in a way that's outside of our control when we're young. The obvious question here is, where does this happen in a detrimental way, and where does it happen in a useful way?
I need to
You
cut
could
my
go
notes.
in many directions with this, but here are a few consequences I think we can take from what we've looked at. First, responsibility and blame. If we're affected in our genes by pollution, upbringing, economic development, stimulation of many kinds, then we have to acknowledge that there are more people responsible for the genetic expression in one person than that individual themselves. Who then is responsible? The parents, the wider community, the polluter, the nation? These are wider questions about justice. Second, liberty. The political philosopher Isaiah Berlin talked about negative liberty, the freedom from interference, and positive liberty, the freedom to do something. Science can help us think about both. To grow in an environment free from pollution is one thing, but to live in a stimulating environment, to have access to books, to good education, welfare, creates the freedom to do more later in life. I think thinking about epigenetics allows us to think about those freedoms from things and freedom to develop in the fullest possible way. That's a social responsibility because the individual is not responsible for how he's developing at that young age. Third, we might think about intervention, who's best suited at what times and where. One of the most interesting conclusions from recent epigenetic studies is that much of this happens and happens to us in the first few years of life, if not in development in the womb. So before we end, I think it's important to have a quick look at where I think many of these studies lead. Early intervention. I think one of the main takeaways from all of this is how much the first few years of a child's life, including the 9 months of pregnancy, affect them for the rest of their lives. We usually think of education as the primary mode of improving a child's environment, but that's not enough. A UK government report found that funding should be shifted from later to earlier interventions, and the children's charity, the Wave Trust, argues that governments should focus on preventing adverse childhood experiences like abuse, neglect and mental illness, etc. And we already have some programs like this, Sure Start in the US and Head Start in the UK, but I think we're only just beginning to work out how to best utilise them. The first head of Head Start, Naomi Eisenstadt, wrote on the London School of Economics blog that the substantial success of the Sure Start scheme has been that the argument about the role government should play between birth and school is now won. We no longer need to deliver more evidence that the preschool years are vital to children's development and that provision of services for young children and families is critically important. The acceptance that there should be provision for such services and that government has a role in regulating and at least partly funding this is now firmly in place. There are also programs like the Nurse Family Partnership in the UK that assigns nurses to low-income families for frequent visits. But we also need to recognise that this isn't enough. A handful of visits and limited funding cannot make up for a history of generational poverty. We should treat having children like the most highly skilled job you can possibly do, because it is, and it has the most consequences for society. We should offer extensive education and courses to pregnant couples and ensure the home environment is as good as it possibly can be. We should extend parental leave and reorganise childcare around the discovery that the first few years of a child's life are crucial. This is, before we even get to the moral and ethical case, just a good return on investment. It used to be thought that genetics were passed down like a blueprint, a precise guide to engineer the body, a code, a script, a recipe book, maybe. But genetics are more like a script that can be read differently depending on the context. As Nessa Kerry has argued, different interpretations of Romeo and Juliet, say, change over time in movies, stage, song, retellings in literature. But I think we can go even further than that. It turns out that actually there's so much in the box, but it interacts with so much of the outside world in so many different ways that it's less a cage and more like a TARDIS, a party, an adventure of some kind that quite literally contains the ingredients for every chef's kitchen that's ever existed, the words of every writer and everything they've ever written, the code that every computer program uses in the world. There's so much to play with in here. But for those 3 billion pairs, those base pairs of ingredients that we have in here, there are then 6 billion others in the world, 7 billion, 9 billion now, to play around with, to interact with. Not to mention the genes and the DNA in every other species, flora and fauna, and the rest of the natural world itself. So I find that not closed up, but actually quite open and exciting. Okay, I'll leave you with a quote from the early 20th century psychologist William James that I think is even more pertinent in the light of epigenetic discoveries. Compared with what we ought to be, we are only half awake. Our fires are damped, our drafts are checked. We are making use of only a small part of our physical and mental resources. Stating the thing broadly, the human individual lives far within his limits. Thank
So yeah, that was the video. It was interesting. His delivery and his style is very good. The way he moved through the arguments from people who talk about nature as like this essentialist thing that decides how a human is, and then moving towards epigenetics and towards the more environmental side, which we call nurture, and also sort of pointing out the political leanings of people who wanted to be nature in a sense, just so they can say that any investments in humanity are a waste of time, because it's just how nature is. Humans will be humans because it's all decided by genetics. And then in the end, sort of taking it home with how important early intervention is, and why we should actually have these programs and these things that help humans, and how it should be about like the society teaching parents and making their lives better just because by virtue of them living better lives while the child isn't even born, that can have a lot of positive effects. And sort of pointing out that this duality argument in itself is sort of mistaken, because there's so much interaction between the outside and the inside that thinking of them as two distinct categories is sort of a waste of time, and unless you have an agenda to try to make it that way, it's not really a duality in that sense. I know from two people are watching on Twitch, so someone is watching on Twitch. Hello, how are you? Okay, now no one's watching on. One person is watching on Twitch. they didn't like to be pointed out. It does say that there are two people watching me though, and they weren't for the whole video, so I know you missed it, but what can you do? I really like this channel and I might come back to it. Okay, now it updates. I don't know how much my commentary added to the video, but I hope it was something fruitful. At the very least, they might get one more subscriber or two more subscribers, because there's not a lot of people watching me here. Now though, I guess you wait a bit. This is something I have to learn as well. Staying silent after you're done with one thing, just so you can make editing easier later when you try to make it into segments. If someone was watching, I could ask how my mic sounds, but no one is apparently. Oh, let me check something. Okay. So I'm a bit tired, so maybe I won't do the third thing, the QAnon thing. But I want to do the gun thing. Let me just find the article. This is the. I hope they don't like ask for subs or whatever. Okay. What is this? Okay, so guns. We know it's a big issue in the US, and because there's been a lot of mass shootings recently, and the mass shootings, like, they've been happening for a while now. They haven't stopped, and it's been a string of, I guess, 4 mass shootings now, like Uvalde and was it the grocery store with the black people in it, the person who targeted them, and then 2 others, and then like before, was it before that, after that, or and one happened in a hospital. And other than that, gun crime and gun death in general in the US is a lot. But in Canada, mass shootings aren't like as big an issue, especially not on schools. But there are still some gun deaths, and I'm not fully clear on all of the policies of Canada but I wanted to educate myself since recently Prime Minister Trudeau talked about a new law that apparently would ban the sale of handguns and sort of the like trading off or like reselling it of the guns. But first we need to like fully know what the law is talking about. So here's the headline. Let me wait to the. Amid a wave of mass shootings in the US, Canada tightens gun laws. The handgun market in Canada has been frozen as Parliament reviews sweeping legal action, including a mandatory buyback of some rifles. Okay, so there's also talk of some, like, I guess, buyback of rifles. It was an unusually hectic week of announcements and news from Canada. A freeze on handgun sales and transfers, the introduction of a gun reform bill that includes a buyback of military style assault rifles. I guess we can look at that as well. Another damning report on sexual misconduct in the military with a roadmap for ending it. Decriminalization of the possession of small. Okay, the rest of the stuff isn't relevant. Last week in this newsletter, my colleague Vyoza Izai discussed how little Canada knows about the source of its so-called ghost gun problem. So we're just getting info on all of this stuff so we can look into it. Given the sweeping gun measures announced this week, let's stay with the topic. Two of the government's plans dominated the news. First, Canada moved immediately to freeze the selling, gifting, trading, and importing of handguns. It's not a ban, but it does mean that the number of handguns legally owned by Canadians outside the military and the police will not increase from the estimated 900,000 owned now. So legally, I guess Canada has 900,000 guns. What we might also need to look at is how much guns Canada has illegally. The other attention grabber was the government's decision to follow up on its earlier ban of military-style assault rifles with a mandatory buyback program. So it's a mandatory buyback program. So people who have these so-called military-style assault rifles would have to give the government their guns and then receive some compensation. The proposed legislation, however, goes beyond the freeze and the ban. It would strip people of their firearms licenses if they had been involved in domestic violence or criminal harassment. I don't know what criminal harassment means. Is it like sexual violence or like physical violence or stuff like that? Yeah, I sort of agree that people who are involved in domestic violence shouldn't have firearm licenses. So that doesn't seem like that bad of a decision. Increase penalties for firearms offenses and require people whom a judge has found to be a threat to themselves or others to turn over their guns to the police. So far, other than like I guess the entire freeze part, the rest of it sounds pretty good, because I'm not sure like how much this freeze would have an effect on gun crime in Canada. Not too familiar with the topic, so that's something else we might have to look into. The announcement made late Monday followed several recent mass shootings in the US, particularly the devastating attack on an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas last week. As of Friday, some 20 mass shootings had taken place over 9 days in that country, a rate of more than 2 a day. Okay, that's a lot more than I thought there were. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau cited the horrific killings when he announced the proposals. But given the complexity of introducing any government bill to Parliament, it's unlikely that a proposal was put together after the Uvalde shootings. So he was planning on this for a while, I guess. One point somewhat lost in the shuffle is that the handgun freeze won't need Parliament's approval. It was already put into effect through a relatively brief series of changes to the Firearms Act. That's interesting. I thought it had to go through the Parliament, so I'm learning. My colleague Max Fisher wrote an explainer contrasting how the Parliament in Canada has acted quickly on gun control, where the United States has remained gridlocked on the. Okay, that's tangential, not relevant to what we're looking at. The government plans to have a formal guidance for gun owners, gun shops, and the small number of people exempt from the new rules, including Olympic and Paralympic athletes. I guess for this specific shooting events within the next few weeks, given the time and lag involved in obtaining a firearms license. The government also hopes to prevent people who don't hold licenses from stocking up on guns last minute before the new directive goes into effect. At least one aspect of gun laws is not changing. The rules that basically limit handgun use to target practice at an approved firing range at home, handgun owners must continue to keep their weapons locked up. That's I don't know how they would enforce that, but that seems like a decent enough law. And it's still illegal to use a handgun against another person in any circumstance. What if someone breaks into your home? The farmer who shot and killed Colton Bushy, a 22-year-old Cree man from Saskatchewan, was acquitted of murder and manslaughter in 2018, but was fined $3,900 Canadian and placed under a 10-year ban on gun ownership for improper firearms storage. Okay, that's another interesting thing in Canada that's different from the US. This week's proposed legislation and change to the handgun rules were praised by multiple gun control groups. There is no right to own guns in this country. Wendy Cukier, the president of the Coalition for Gun Control, said in a statement, "Legal handguns are a significant source of handguns used in crime and are the guns most often used in mass shootings." There aren't that many mass shootings in Canada, though, right? But Raquel Dancho, the Conservative member of Parliament who speaks for the party on public safety matters, criticized the bill on Twitter, saying it doesn't deal with what she views as the root cause of gun violence in our cities: illegal guns smuggled into Canada by criminal gangs. Just over a year ago, the Canada Border Agency announced a joint task force with its counterpart in the United States to stem the cross-border flow of guns. Many people welcome the changes but urge the government to go even further. John Tory, the mayor of Toronto, called for a national ban on handguns. It could happen in Canada. I mean, there's no reason it couldn't. There's no way of knowing if the handgun freeze and the assault weapons buyback program will affect gun crimes and gun-related suicides. A review of international firearms legislation prepared by the Public Safety Department's Research Division in 2020 and released under the Access to Information laws found little to no quantitative evidence for the effectiveness of firearm buyback programs in reducing firearm violence. This one's not linked. Public Safety Department's Research Division. And a study released last November by Dr. Kaylin Langman of the medical school at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, found that while there may be an association between legislation and a reduction in suicide rate by firearms, overall suicide remained unaffected due to substitution into other methods. Um, but isn't there like some research on how guns are like such an easy way to that people who wouldn't like if they had time to think, not commit suicide, but with guns it becomes easier for them to. Many people pushing for tighter gun control also noted that women are disproportionately affected by gun crimes. The presence of guns is our first indicator that fatal intimate partner violence is a high risk. Amanda Dale, a family lawyer in Brampton, Ontario, said in a statement in response to the gun reform bill, "For those who feel today their privileges have been scaled back, I would remind them that this is not the same as being stalked, threatened, and killed by the person who is supposed to love you." Okay, this might be a different story, I'm not sure. Trans Canada. Okay, this doesn't seem relevant. Okay, I don't know why that was there in the end. So, but what this is saying is that the government is having a freeze on handguns and a buyback for rifles, and sort of stopping access of firearm licenses for people who commit domestic violence and what do you call them? People who commit domestic violence and some other crimes, like the way the wording they use was a bit strange. What did they call it? Assault something. Whatever. But you can't use in Canada you can't use your guns outside ranges either. And that also the point that the handgun trees won't need Parliament's approval. Okay, let's look at stats for gun laws. Like, let me search. Not gun laws, guns. Like how many guns there are, how many illegal ones there are, and violence and all of that. Let me find a good source. Gun ownership stats. Oh, no, this isn't it. I'm trying to find a source that doesn't seem biased as well. But I found a site, but I don't know where the sources are from. So, no source cited. Hmm. Canada Safety Council. Still nothing. I found something that I guess we can look at. Um, let's see. Yeah, so this one is about the trends in firearm related violent crime in Canada. It's from 2009 to 2020. It's from Statistics Canada, so it's reliable. The highlights: firearm related violent crime represents a small proportion of police reported violent crime in Canada, accounting for 2.8% of all victims of violent crime reported by police in 2020. So it's not even that like immediate of an issue in compared to like in the US. Um, so it could be like I guess political point scoring. The culture doesn't seem to be as big as in the US either. But let's look at the stats anyways. In 2020, the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic, there were 8,344 victims of police-related violent crimes where a firearm was present during the commission of the offense, or a rate of 29 per 100,000 population. This rate was unchanged when compared to 2019. This was not the case in all jurisdictions, however, as rates of firearm related violence increased in some areas and decreased in others. Between 2019 and 2020, notable increases in firearm related violent crime were reported in southern rural British Columbia plus 34, the northern rural part of Ontario plus 32, rural Alberta plus 32, and plus 31 in the south. So increased in some places but not in the others. Between 2009 and 2013, the rate of victims of firearm related violence and crime in Canada decreased, which aligned with violent crime trends overall. However, rates of victims of firearm related violent crime started an upward climb in 2014, with the largest documented increase between 2014 and 2015. So it did increase a bit, I guess. The article examines firearm related violent crimes in the 2 6-year periods before and after the notable increase in 2015. Between 2009 to 2014 and 2015 to 2020, and shows that the increase occurred in most jurisdictions in Canada. Much of the increase in the rate of firearm related crime between the 2 6-year periods was the result of significant increase in the rate of firearm specific violent offenses of discharging a firearm with intent, pointing a firearm, and use of firearm in an indictable offense. Okay, here's some actual stats. In 2020, police reported a total of 743 homicide victims in Canada, or a rate of 1.95 per 100,000 population. For 277 of these victims, a firearm was used to commit the homicide. So there were 743 homicides, I guess, victims in Canada. and then out of them 277. So this is like less than 1/3. No, wait. I guess a bit more than 1/3. After a gradual decrease between 2009 and 2013, the rate of firearms related homicides has increased since 2013 with a single digit decline, in 2018. Okay, as a result, the proportion of homicides that involved a firearm rose from 26% of all homicides, a little lower. It was 26% in 2013 and 37% in 2020. In that sense, like, I guess since the homicide crimes are so low already, the increase is significant in that sense, from 26% to 37%. So I guess the laws are relevant in that case. The handguns were the most serious weapon present in the majority of firearm-related violence crime between 2009 and 2014, 59%, and between 2015 and 2020, 59%. Oh, it's still almost the same. Not almost the same, it is the same. 59%. Rates of firearm-related violent crime were higher in rural areas than in urban centers. That's interesting because usually in urban centers this stuff happens more, but notably high in northern rural regions. Okay, I guess. However, fire-related crime generally accounted for a higher proportion of violent crime in urban cities. Wait, rates were higher, but when crime did happen in urban centers, involved guns relatively, in that sense, more. As such, people living in some rural areas may be more at risk of firearm crime, but violent crime that occurs in urban areas are generally more likely to involve a firearm. Okay, I guess rural areas are less safer in terms of like firearm violence in relative terms, but if a crime does happen in urban areas that involves violence, then it's going to be with some firearms. In 2020, more than 6 in 10, 63% of the firearms-related violent crimes in urban areas involved handguns. So, and handguns keep coming up. In rural areas, the firearm present was most commonly a rifle or shotgun, 46% in the rural south and 39% in the rural north. I can't say rural for, well, I don't know why. But okay, so handguns, like, they're more prevalent in urban areas in that sense. In 2020, over 4 out of 5, 83% of victims of violent crime where fire was present were either not injured. Okay, so even with the crimes, most of the people that were involved in that violent crime were not injured, which is 61%, or they sustained a minor injury that required no professional medical treatment or some sort of first aid. 22%. Victims of firearm-related violent crimes were less likely to be injured than victims where no firearm was present, but were more likely to sustain a serious injury or die. Okay, so like, not firearm-related crime, people were more likely to be injured, but less likely to sustain something serious or die in that sense. The accused in firearm-related violent crimes was most frequently a stranger to the victim. That's also interesting. In 2020, for 55% of male victims and 41% of female victims. For female victims, it wasn't a stranger. But for male victims, it was most likely a stranger. This was driven, however, by firearm-related violence in urban areas. Overall, 1 in 4, 25% female victims of firearm-related violent crimes was victimized by A current or former spouse or other intimate partner. Okay, so then maybe knew the person but not like a partner or whatever. That's only 25%. In contrast, 2.2% of male victims of firearm-related violent crime in 2020 were similarly victims of intimate partner violence. So that's where I think the domestic violence thing would help reducing that 25%. Instead, among victims, a higher proportion of males were victimized by a stranger, friend, or casual acquaintance. Okay, so 83% versus 64%. For women, firearm-related intimate partner violence was most frequent in rural areas. In 2020, there were 8.1 female victims of firearm-related IPV per 100,000 female population in the rural south and 31 per 100,000 in the rural north, compared to 4.1 in the urban areas. Okay, that is much higher. The firearm-related IPV accounted for nearly 1/3 of female victims in the rural south and 38% in the rural north. एक बात ना, oh, okay. So out of all, okay, that's okay. Although firearm-related IPV for male victims was also high in rural areas, rates were very low compared to females, 1.4 and 2.8 and 0.9 for urban areas. The majority of incidents involving a victim of firearm-related violent crimes was solved with at least one accused identified, with those in the rural north 83% and rural south 32%. More often solved than in urban is 54%. I guess it's because they're strangers. The individual accused were predominantly male, 87%. Male accused, 88%, were more likely than females, 82% to be charged for in the incident. So when they're accused, out of them 88% were charged and 82% were not. And it's 87% males that are accused versus only 13% females. Youth were less likely to be charged than young adults or older. In 2020, among police, there was reported information on organized crime or gang-related criminal activity. 6% of victims of firearm-related violent crimes were victims in incidents that police identified as confirmed or suspected to be committed by and for the benefit of a criminal organization or street gang. Most 35% of these victims were male. So that proportion is low as well, like for criminal organizations or gangs. That's where most of the narrative of like illegal firearms, I think, comes from, with gangs and criminal organizations. Okay, now let's look at some other thing. Firearm restrictions in Canada. There are three categories: prohibited, restricted, and non-restricted. Prohibited are fully automatic firearms, sawed-off rifles, shotguns, and other firearms which cited within the regulations. Handguns are classified as restricted, while rifles and shotguns also look as long guns are usually non-restricted. That's interesting. I guess I get with shotguns, but which sorts of rifles? Canadian law requires that an individual have a valid license in order to own or possess a firearm. Various amendments have been made to the Criminal Code and the Firearms Act over the past decade. In 2012, Bill C-19 ending the Long Gun Registry Act, eliminated the registration of non-restricted firearms. That's interesting. So they ended that registry. Why would you do that? Further amendments were later introduced related to restricted and prohibited weapons and to the licensing, tracing, and transportation of firearms in 2020. Following the mass shooting in Nova Scotia, the federal government amended regulations by order in council to reclassify as prohibited over 1,500 models and variants of assault-style firearms, particularly semi-automatic rifles. There are apparently data gaps related to firearms as well. There's little known information currently collected about the characteristics of these firearms, such as details about the exact type of gun, who owned it, how it was stored, and whether the owner was licensed. In addition, while some police services collect information on shootings, there is no consistent definition of shooting applied by police services in Canada, nor are there consistent criteria used to assess whether a shooting actually occurred. That's a bit weird. Example, okay. Of particular concern, there is currently little information available to determine the source of firearm usage in crime. For example, whether the gun used in the crime was stolen, illegally purchased, or smuggled into the country. This is something that, like, I guess they have to look into, that they haven't. This is not recorded by police services, recorded inconsistently, or some places the information is simply not available. For example, not all firearms are recovered from the homicides. Only some of these guns are available for tracing. The RCMP administered by the Ontario blah blah blah. Nature of, okay, so there's some confusion about the nature of firearms related violence as well. Okay. Okay, so they're, I guess they're trying, but it will take years for these changes to fully implemented. These changes include collecting information on the number of firearms recovered, seized, or stolen. That's good. Improving measures related to shootings by developing a standard definition to be used by. Okay, yeah, that's good. Developing a standard definition for the crime gun. Okay, yeah, makes sense. It represents less than 3% of violent crime. Okay, 21% was from stuff that was available close by, like a knife or blunt equipment, or a physical force was used. What's the majority? That being said, just over 3/4 of victims of violent crimes involved an incident where no weapon was present. Okay, so the biggest thing is like just, I guess, people fighting. I don't know, like just your hands bare. That's okay, sure. Fire related are highest in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and the Northern Territories. Due to high rates of robbery and major assaults was present. The second highest combined rate of firearm homicide murder in 2020. Oh, okay, so fewer than 2% in all three. Oh, okay, so they just have higher crime. And here's a chart. Firearm related violent crime rates as a percentage of all violent crime Selected census metropolitan areas 2020. Okay, so the blue line is firearm-related violent crimes as a percentage of all violent crime, and the rate of okay. So some of them are, all of them are really low, but then some of them are really, really low, like Thunder Bay, which is less than 10 per 100,000 people. And Toronto is low as well, but then the highest is like slightly above 60. And then Regina and Brentford, where they're like the highest. It's also the highest in terms of the crime being done. In Toronto, it's slightly above 4%. So what I'm getting by this is that it's not the biggest issues. It's risen a bit in recent years. There's not enough data on whether it's like legal guns that cause the violence or illegal guns that cause the violence. So the effect of this on gun violence isn't that known. That being said, there isn't like a vigor or like as extensive a gun culture, so there isn't a lot of pushback on this. And mostly it's like a wait and see type of thing where you don't know whether it's going to be like a good effect or a bad effect. Now they're just talking about trends. So all violent crime, firearm related violent crime. So apparently violent crime was reducing, and then it sort of increased, and now it's reducing again. But I guess it reduced in 2019, and then, but with guns, for some reason, after 2013, it started increasing. But look at the difference. The highest for guns is around like 30 per 100,000 population. But the crimes itself is 1,200, higher than 1,200 per 100,000. So, and now it's like closer to 1,000. So guns are a really small part of all of this. Then, but the increase was reflected in most jurisdictions. I don't know why that happened. Maybe wasn't it right? Like where the registry thing stopped in 2013. I'm not sure. The rate of firearm-related violent crime in Canada was found to be 20% higher in the 6 years than over the previous 6 years. Rates increased most in the rural north and south, with the highest rates reported in the rural north. So urban trends and farm, blah, blah. I guess these are averages. In urban, there was a small change, but not much. In rural, there was a noticeable bump. In rural south, in rural north. So I guess it goes on and on. I guess, but the main takeaway is the same. That gun crime did increase a bit in the preceding years. It's still not like a really big issue. Handguns are like the biggest culprits. And there's no like data on whether it's illegal guns causing these things or it's legal guns. So we'll wait and see with how gun crime moves on. But yeah, there's no push against this moves not that big of a push. At least there's going to be some conservatives. And yeah, ultimately it's not as consequential as with the US. But like looking at the US and gun crime is gonna be more fruitful in that sense. Because that's where like a lot of gun crime happens, and especially like mass shootings, and especially what do you call that, mass shootings in schools and stuff like that. Yeah, so I guess in the end this was a massive waste of time. I don't know. Just to say, we'll wait and see. I don't think there's point in looking at it beyond this now. Yeah, here it is, asking for that money. It's not a lot, but I don't read the New York Times that often. Why would I? And with that, I'm tired, so I'm not sure whether I should do the segment on the QAnon stuff. Maybe I could change the title of the stream, reflect the accuracy. Look into something else for next time. No one really joined or was invested, but it was a nice blueprint of getting comfortable with doing the segments and getting some idea of how this works and getting some experience under the belt in that sense. Yeah, I think the main thing is that I consistently keep streaming, and hopefully someone finds it interesting and sticks around, and then hopefully a few more people stick around, and I have like this small community that I can interact with. That is that I can claim, not like I can have a sense of ownership with, instead of like someone else's ancillary community. And yeah, right now, like of course I have no one's watching me right now. I'm just speaking into the void. Whoever watches this is gonna watch this in the future. But yeah, have a good night, have a lovely night, and I think I'm gonna stop the stream now.